Not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha everyone, this is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
Miraculous vibes, love to conquer these craziest times for us. The murder and crime, children hunger, surrounded by guns and drugs. Yeah, and I know deep inside that we all like to just go back. Yeah, to the days when our lives felt a little bit more intact. Yeah. Why do we hate and kill one another? Why do we feed the flames? Boy, the road with joy is to rediscover we are all the same. I believe that one day we'll see love wrapped around the globe with hearts full of hope. I believe that everything we've lost is something we will find forever. What the world needs is hope, hope, oh, oh, yeah, hope, oh, 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 oh. You know what the world needs is hope, hope, oh, 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 oh. I can see the skies are rolling, the sun's fire's got the whole world constantly glowing. As it sets down in Lahaina, the sun rises down in Africa, and the children they play. But how is it when the same? But some they are better. Does the paper in your pocket really make you a greater man? We all bleed the same. When will freedom reign? Why do we hate and kill one another? Why do we feed the flames? The road with joy is to rediscover we are all the same. I believe that one day we'll see love wrapped around the globe with hearts full of hope. I believe that everything we've lost is something we will find forever. What the world needs is hope, hope, oh, oh, oh. Yeah, hope. Is hope, hope, oh, 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 yeah, oh, 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 we all could use some hope, oh, we need it, oh, everybody needs some hope, yeah.
Hey, aloha, my friends, and welcome to another Fun Talk Story session. We just heard Chloe Kai with Hope. It's a song about hope for the future. In mid-podcast, well, we're going to hear a song called Coastin', performed by Iration. Now, I'm here in my home office studio with my good poker pal, Josh Coffin. And, Josh has got an interesting story, right? Or he wouldn't be here. But again, everybody has an interesting story. I should say that Josh and his wife, Kim, if you want to hear a long version of Josh's story, they did about 6.5 hours on a podcast called Mormon Stories. It was about 3 parts, right, Josh?
Yeah, 3 parts.
3 parts. And it was, I listened to the whole thing. It was very interesting. I learned a lot. But, we're just going to do a little shorter than 6.5 hours today.
Hopefully.
All right, Josh. Well, hey, man, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Thanks for having me, Larry. It's great to be here with you, and it's been great to be your friend living in St. George, Utah, and it's been awesome to meet you and know you. So,
well, and it's been fun. It's always fun to get to know people, and we do that through different ways. A lot of folks that listen to the podcast know I play softball, and they hear those stories. But I do other things too, and one of them is we play poker from time to time, and so we've had a chance to get to know each other a little bit doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to get to group of guys together sometimes and just have those activities that you do. And poker's been a fun one to get to know a group for sure.
Well, and a lot of the guys are closer to my age. You're a little bit more like my kid's age. So you've got to be what, mid-30s?
Mid-30s, yeah, 35, yeah.
Right on, man. Well, okay. Well, hey, let's just start off with, I know a little bit about you. Like I said, I listened to those 6.5 hours of your podcast, so I do know a little bit about your story, even beyond just knowing you from playing poker and just goofing and talking. But I know you really grew up in Idaho, but why don't you talk about those early years of growing up and just take her from there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Yeah, I grew up in Idaho Falls, Idaho, so southeastern Idaho. I think kindergarten was when we moved there. I was born in Utah. Parents both went to Ricks College, actually, in Rexburg, Idaho, and then they went to BYU in Provo, and they had me their senior year of college in 88.
Now, because I already know Ricks College, which is now what, BYU Idaho?
Now it's BYU Idaho, and it's kind of funny because they went to Ricks and then BYU, and then I actually went to BYU Idaho once it got changed to a 4-year school, so it's kind of come full circle there. So,
and you grew up in Rexburg?
Idaho Falls, which is just about 30 minutes south of Rexburg.
Yeah, I need to do a little better job of listening since you just said that like 90 seconds ago. But but I was thinking, I guess, the fact that for our listeners that are listening in Finland, that's pretty much Mormon Central also. Just as I was born in Utah County, but that area of Idaho is very, very much Mormon or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I just want to point that out to kind of give people a feel for where you grew up. It was still very much very conservative.
Yes, Idaho was very conservative and very heavily LDS at the time, very Mormon. I think one of the seminary teachers at the big building along our high school estimated that between 75 and 85% of the high school took the seminary classes. So that's almost that 3/4 of the high school was LDS or went to seminary. So it's its own Mormon bubble in Idaho, similar to Utah, but a little bit different, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more extreme with rules. I actually had a pretty good childhood growing up there. I was from kindergarten all the way through high school. Some of the things that I have not been able to mention before on other podcasts is just some of that upbringing. Mormonism really plays to the benefit of boys. And so being a boy, the oldest of 4, I just had the whole world in my hands. I had younger brothers, and my mom loved the focus on young men and boys. And so I always had such good encouragement from my mother. She took such pride in my accomplishments. So I did get a lot of love in that regard. Something funny that I never really realized until my wife started her own company was that I was very entrepreneurial myself as a young kid. So I did things like, mowing lawns and doing paper routes from age 9, 10, 11, and 12, which is kind of funny thinking about the kids in this day and age doing a paper route at 10 years old. But even before that, when I was 7 and 8 years old, we lived in a brand new neighborhood where there were a lot of new construction. And I remember that I told my mom, I said, I want to sell soda. I want to do like a lemonade stand, if you will, but I want to make it mobile. And so I would get my wagon out, tie a rope to the wagon to my bicycle. I'd fill up a cooler full of ice from those trays in the freezer that we used to have. And we would go and get those 12 packs of sodas and put them in this big cooler. And I'd ride my bike around selling it to neighborhood kids. But I got really lucky because there were all these construction workers nearby. And they, middle of the day, it's hot, and they'd want some sodas. And so I think I was selling them for 50 cents a can, buying them for around 12 to 18 cents a can. So a funny story, one time he said, "Hey, do you got any barley pop, kid?" and I didn't know what barley pop meant, and he was referring to a beer. And I said, sorry, I can't help you with the barley pop, but I can get you a Mountain Dew or a Dr. Pepper or whatever else. And so just from the earliest age, I had that itch to make money. My parents were both school teachers, so we always had enough, but there was always kind of this sense of there's not much, and I would never really felt like I could ask my parents for money. So I just felt the need to earn. And so selling sodas, paper routes, mowing lawns in the neighborhood, I just really wanted to prove myself. And then I got into scouting at age 12. I loved scouting for a lot of reasons. I had a good experience in scouting. I know not everybody does, but the Boy Scouts taught me a lot of skills as a young boy. And I got put into like leadership positions, and I was even in a church leadership position called Deacon's Quorum President, which is just a 12-year-old boy who gets more power and authority than he should have. But it taught me quite a bit about leadership. You know, I really benefited from that system of speaking publicly and helping other people and gathering people around a certain cause. And so that's kind of those early years in Idaho, for sure.
You said 4 boys, so no girls?
So it was actually 3 boys all in a row, 2 years apart. Each of us are 2 years apart. And then when I was 14, my mom had my sister. So I was a really late baby. I think she was 39 at the time. And so I was 14. My brother was 12. My other brother was about 9. And so this was a really weird, you know, we thought they were done, and but she did get her girl eventually, so the 4th kid. But I mostly grew up with the 2 brothers, right? And then my sister was a baby for my high school years.
Okay. 4 kids in Idaho. And I know times have changed a little bit. It used to be families were much larger. Even my family, we had 6 children. How about your mom and dad? Do they come from bigger families?
Yeah, they do. My dad's one of 6, and my mom's actually one of 4, so I guess hers is the same as us. But yeah, 4 actually did feel small. We were 3 for a long time. And Idaho Falls had families of 6, 7, 8 all over the place. Mm-hmm. My uncle has 9. So there's just a lot of families a lot of big families. So being 3 or 4 was actually considered small.
And I had somebody ask me one time why Mormons had so many kids, and I don't know what the exact answer is, and you know more than I do, but I was just always told that we believed there were spirits up in heaven that needed to come down and be born and have a body. And so this was our way of helping that happen, was by having big families. Is that the way you understand it?
Yeah, that's something I always heard too, because I always would question, like, these big Mormon families, we're not working on farms anymore, even back then, and why are we having these huge families? But it was because there were spirits in heaven that needed to come down, and if we didn't have them, then they wouldn't get a chance to come down. And also birth control was never really talked about, kind of one of those hush things. And so I always had friends that would ask about, like, do you guys believe in that? And some did, some didn't, but it was definitely a topic that was taboo. Anything sexual or around pregnancy was not something discussed, which definitely backfired among the youth and teens.
So how did you like growing up in Idaho? Did you feel like you had a good experience growing up?
Overall, I do. I think Idaho Falls was a great town, kind of a smaller, similar to St. George. I think it was around 70,000 to 100,000 population, had some outskirt areas. 30 minutes north is Rexburg, which is BYU, Idaho. And, 4 hours south is Salt Lake. And that was kind of the big city for us, was to go to Salt Lake, about a 4-hour drive away. But I did enjoy it. It was really family oriented. Looking back, I definitely had a sheltered experience because almost every single girl that I dated in high school was Mormon. Every single experience I had was with a youth group among Mormons. I actually thought as a teenager that those who didn't go to church were just inactives. My brain couldn't comprehend that someone might do something else because it was so common that someone who didn't come to church, I just kind of thought that they were Mormon but just didn't go, which is ridiculous. In fact, that was the joke of our high school. They would say, oh, that other 15% that doesn't come to seminary, they're just inactives. It's like, no, they were Catholics and they were atheists and they were other things. But that's kind of the bias I grew up with, was sort of this super conservative bubble of Idaho. And so going on a mission at 19 really opened my eyes to the world because it was so sheltered in Idaho for all those years.
And where did you go on your mission?
So I went to Tampico, Mexico. It's a city on the Gulf Coast there in Mexico. I think it was about 300,000 people, if I remember right. And then the mission encapsulated quite a few areas inland. So there was, Poza Rica and Ciudad Victoria. So there's a couple different states within the mission. But Tampico was the main area. So I went at 19 out there for 2 years. Well, not quite 2 years. I got sent home 4 months early, which is a whole story in itself.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that from the other podcast. And I think maybe we even talked about it playing poker one night, but just about how that made you feel and that stigma from coming home early and different things. And people who don't know anything about a Mormon mission won't understand what I'm talking about. But you and I know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, a lot of cultural pressure, especially among young men. I mean, if they say it was a commandment, you're literally required to go. You don't have a choice, which is pretty hard because you're just a young kid trying to figure out your life. Like, should I go to college? Should I get married? Should I go explore and live my 20s? No, you need to go do this thing. So I really remember leaving on my mission at 19. I remember thinking to myself, I don't want to do this, but I know that all the girls I've ever dated, my mom, my grandpa, my dad, everybody, they'll be so proud of me. I'll get so much more love. It was conditional love. I didn't know it at the time, but it was all conditional love. It was, if I do this thing, they'll be very proud of me. And I had uncles and aunts.
And you were the first of 18 grandchildren.
First of 18 grandkids. That's right. So I've got there's 18 grandkids on my mom's side, and I'm the oldest because my mom's the oldest of 4 as well. And we had a grandpa who was very wealthy, and he offered to pay for missions, and I was the first one to go. So I remember being a 17-year-old kid. It's about $10,000 or so to pay for a mission, the two-year experience, which is, you're volunteering, but you also pay your own way if you can. And I remember saving up all those years, mowing lawns and paper routes, and I got a job in a warehouse as a 16-year-old doing forklifts, loading trucks, and I did that at night, like 6 to 10 p.m. in the evening. So I'd go to school, I'd go to sports, I played football and basketball, and then I'd go to that job, and I'd do 20 hours a week. And so I barely had time for homework and things, but I was just so overscheduled because I was just trying to get praise and love from my parents, right? Because they didn't have a lot of money. So me working really took some burden off of them. Doing all those things to accomplish things in sports was so important to them, basketball and football. I really didn't love basketball very much, but my dad played basketball at Rick's. And so it was really important to him that we all played basketball. But I remember saying, Dad, we're all in the 6 foot and under club. So basketball is not really our thing. We're all kind of stocky and built for wrestling. I was definitely built for football, but basketball was kind of what we had to do. And that was kind of, in fact, I've told my friends before that my dad defines the character of a person based on how many sports they play and whether or not they play basketball. And so if you're over 6 foot and don't play basketball, he would always call it kind of like a waste of height. Which thinking about that now, that's kind of crazy. But that's kind of that. Speaking about that conditional love, right? I just was trying to accomplish so many things. Boy Scouts was a great one where I would earn merit badges and do a lot of things to get praise. Get my Eagle Scout at age 14. Those were things where I could get praise and love. And so that's why I went on my mission, is I really was just doing the culturally acceptable thing. Did I believe in it or not believe in it? I thought I did. I really wasn't sure. I was 19. I didn't really know. But any girl that I had ever wanted to date was invested in me going as well. So I really just didn't see any way out of that world. It was my entire world at the time. So.
And that shows how things changed from the time I went into the time you went. Because when I went, there really wasn't any pressure to go. I mean, I knew guys that went. I knew guys that didn't go. I went because the prophet at the time, Spencer Kimball, he said, you're supposed to go. So I was like, well, I believed he was the prophet. I had no answer to a prayer or anything like that. I just believed he was the prophet. So I went. But let me tell you, it sucked. You talk about the pressure of not disappointing your parents. If it wasn't for that, I would have come home after 10 days because it just sucked. And it never got any better in 2 years. I mean, people say, oh, your mission, it's such a great time. I've truthfully told people it's 90% crap and 10% all right. And I've told that to other people who went and they're like, that's how my mission was. But every once in a while you'll get somebody to say, oh no, I loved my full 2 years. It was awesome. So I'm like, okay, maybe I had the wrong mindset or maybe I went to the wrong place. I
think a lot of them would tell themselves that though, right? To try to justify, oh, it was great. And they tell themselves it was something but if people that are realistic and honest, I mean, you're getting rejected day in and day out for a message that people don't want to hear. And yeah, you have some wins along the way and people who do want to hear it, but it's mostly rejection. You're out there trying to do something that you would never do at that age. Like, who's going to go share a message at 19? And now it's 18. They've lowered the age even further. because so many missionaries would do things, age 18, 19 and decide, oh, actually, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
So by lowering that age, they've even got, in my opinion, the indoctrination even younger, because like at 18, how do you know what you want to do? I mean, these seniors in high school now, they're getting their mission call during their senior year.
I know.
Before they've even graduated high school. I did construction for a year after high school and saved up a ton of money, which was great. But a lot of guys who I knew during that year would either mess up, quote unquote, or do something that they shouldn't do. And then it would struggle to get out on their mission. So they lowered it even further. But just to summarize the mission, I did get sent home 4 months early. It's 2 years long. I did get sent 4 months early. So I was almost there. I made it 20 months. We had a new mission president come in. He really cracked down on the rules. Mexico was a very, very successful area for the church. A lot of baptisms, a lot of receptive people to Americans and to this message of Joseph Smith. And so we had a lot of success. So sometimes the rules weren't as important we were just trying to, be 19, 20-year-old kids and enjoy our lives. And so we had a new mission president come in and he wanted us to all, tattle on each other. And I refused to do it. I basically said, no, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear. I'm not going to tattle. I'm not going to, this weird culture of trying to get people in trouble. It was just very secretive and weird. And so he sent me home, and you can imagine that Idaho Falls community, 80% or so LDS, how receptive they were to me coming home early. In fact, I had multiple girls I dated in high school, one of which I thought I might marry, and coming home, she wouldn't even be alone with me because they just assume you've done some sort of terrible transgression or sin, that maybe you've had sex or something. And so I just was rejected immediately by not only the girls I dated, but just by, leaders in the area, adults. You just almost get like labeled as just not good enough, which for me, my whole life I had been a people pleaser. I was all about making sure I was good enough. And so then that was my first, looking back, I'm glad it happened because it sort of humbled me and it set the tone for my future, which we can get to. But at the time, if I had come home after 2 full years, I would have had my head would have been so much bigger than it was. And I would have had my mom's praise, my grandfather's praise. I'm glad I didn't get all that because it helped shape my future. So
yeah, you're glad now, but at the time,
it was terrible.
It was terrible. I remember you talking about it, and you even got emotional when you were talking about it, just because it was such a difficult thing to go through, knowing that people didn't know the story. And so, yeah, you're dealing with people and their assumptions, which is never fun.
Right. Yeah. So that was tough as a young. It forces you to grow up in a lot of ways, even though you're not psychological. I mean, they say your brain's developed. I want to say it's 25 or 26 is when your brain finishes developing. We're just still kind of kids, and in some ways, I know that you can still go to college in your 20s and learn a lot, but you're still developing. And so, you go do that for a couple of years. You come home and you're almost just traumatized. Like, I've got to get my life together. There's this sense of urgency or timeline, which doesn't make sense to anyone outside the Mormon culture. Because even in other religions, there's not like you have to get married at 21, you have to do this at 22. There, maybe go to college and graduate. There's really some of the only expectations you hear. So the timeline and the urgency really just put me on this trajectory. I mean, I got married 1 year after I got home off my mission. So immediately got married and went to college. So just right into these big life choices, back to back to back. Not a lot of thought necessarily put into them, just a lot of pressure, right? So
you did get married then at 22, I guess, or
just before my 22nd birthday.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a couple weeks before my 22nd birthday.
And I did the same thing. So, yeah. And again, people don't understand that, but when you're part of a high demand religion that controls your behavior, your information, your thoughts, and your emotions, if they say jump, you jump. If you want to be a good member of that high demand religion. And we all did at that time, right? We wanted to, we'd just done our missions. We wanted to move on to the next stage of life. As a matter of fact, my mission president, as I was leaving my 2 years, said, okay, your next step in life now is to go and get married. And since I had a girlfriend that I'd known for 7 years and she'd written to me my whole mission, it was pretty easy.
Yeah.
You said you lasted a year. I lasted like 4 months. It's embarrassing to say it now, but people that grew up in our religion understand it.
Yes.
Those on the outside are like, you guys are nuts.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's so irresponsible to think about it in today's terms, to tell even teenagers to get married, to get married. And a lot of it goes back to that sexual purity rule. I mean, if you think about it, if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of us are just wanting to have sex because we're told not to have sex before marriage. And that's not the only reason I got married, but a lot of the people that came home from missions, you're 21 years old and you've never done that. And you really want to do that. It's a big part of your life. And so a lot of these couples are getting married for lust, not for love, because they have these strict rules around that. And that has repercussions later, I think. I've done a lot of studying lately in my 30s as we've deconstructed a high demand religion. And one thing I've learned a lot about is if you can control sexual guilt, if you can impose guilt and shame on a person for sexuality in any way, you can really control anything, because it's such a natural part of who we are to be sexual. And if you can control that, you can control the money that they donate, the way they spend their time. There's so many things around guilt and shame that if you can get them for something like sex or for their sexual life, you can get them in so many other ways. And that's really how the confession is set up with Mormonism, is that, you've got to tell the bishop your sins. And if you've got sins, which we all do, then they can kind of keep you in this loop of you need the church to get better and you got to pay money to the church to tithe. And so it's kind of this cycle, and it's hard to get out of that. It's hard to see through that. And so that's why I jumped right into a marriage. That was a big part of it. It was I found a young girl. She was 18. Actually, I met her at 17 and a half, which is kind of crazy to say that. It's kind of a fun story. It was actually in Idaho Falls. I was saving up, working 2 jobs, getting ready to go to college. And this girl came into Olive Garden. I was a waiter at night at Olive Garden. During the day, I was actually translating Spanish for doctors locally for the patients that were Spanish speaking only. So my Spanish helped a lot with my career early on. But I was doing waiting tables in the evenings, and this family came in with 4 kids. She was a senior in high school. I didn't know that she was that age, but I left my number with their family after a long kind of conversation back and forth with her parents, and kind of, there was this pretty girl, right? But I'm not going to leave my number with a family. That's weird. I get fired for that, actually. Happened a lot when there's just parties of girls and waiters. That's normal. But we come in with a family, you don't leave your number because the parents. But I just had this feeling. I kept looking at her. She wouldn't look at me. She kept blushing. She was with her, 2 younger siblings, her twin brother and her parents. And I decided at the very end of the meal, and I was having a good time talking to her parents. I said, "How often do you guys come into Olive Garden?" And they said, "Oh, we come in, once a month. It's one of the only Italian places to eat around here." And I said, "Okay, well, next time you come in, we'll go on a double date. I'll take your daughter and I'll pay for the check." And I set my number on the table. And so it's still kind of a fun story today, but that's how I initially did meet her. For the record, she never texted me or called me. I had to look her up on social media through my brother, who's younger than me, to find her. And eventually she went on some dates with me. But yeah, that's how I met Kim.
And Kim, at that time especially, was very...
vulnerable.
Yeah, quiet.
Yeah, reserved. Absolutely.
Yeah. Even though now in a setting, like if she was sitting here with you, you'd be talking.
Sure.
But she would chime in once in a while. I remember you saying early in your marriage, you had a hard time even talking to her.
Yeah, she just didn't, there wasn't much there. And I probably should have seen that there was probably something wrong with that. There might have been some sort of abuse going on or something that was wrong. But she played hard to get, and that was what got me, very interested, as I really wanted to kind of win her over, and it was kind of like an exciting chase. But she didn't speak a lot. She was very quiet, and as being married to me, who never shuts up, we sort of had to meet in the middle. I had to learn to hold my tongue sometimes, and she had to learn to open up more. And over time, that definitely, we've merged together, and now she's this powerful businesswoman, mother of 3. She's overcome so much, and I look at her now and I think back to that college, teen bride, basically at 18, and it feels like different people completely. I mean, she just has this strong voice now, big social media presence. Couldn't be prouder of her. And I'm just kind of glad I helped pull. I played a small part in pulling her out of that. I mean, everything she accomplished was her, but I do think we influence each other for good to kind of see, some of the damage of the environments we grew up in. But yeah, she's a powerful voice now. It's so great to see her. Even in college, though, she was still pretty quiet during those 4 years of college. And we were at BYU, Idaho, right, which is Rexburg, only 30 minutes from home. Her parents lived in Rigby, and they still do. Rigby, Idaho, which is just a small town in between Idaho Falls and Rexburg, and known for its very, very conservative beliefs. In BYU, Idaho as well, right? You can't wear shorts. You couldn't wear flip-flops. You had to shave your beard every day. They had a lot of really weird rules. They actually used to think that BYU was a liberal school compared to BYU, Idaho, which makes me laugh because BYU is one of the most conservative universities in the nation. BYU, Idaho took it another step forward, though. They're going to live a higher law. They had some different presidents in there, like David Bednar was in there, and Eyring and a few others, Clark. And they just wanted to go letter of the law, very much like the Pharisees in the Bible, too, though. Just like all these rules that make no sense that Jesus wouldn't have cared about, but they decided to go that far, and it was miserable. I shaved my face every day, wore a shirt and tie every day for 4 years. I actually worked as a staff member while I was going to school. So Kim and I, married at 21, 22-ish. I guess I was about to turn 22, and then 18. We go up to school and get married together, start as freshmen. We're just worried about like starting our lives. We got to make some money. We got to do these things. So I actually started managing the married housing, they called it, which was 150 apartments for married couples. And then Kim managed the girls' dorms it was called the Ridge, and it had like 150 girls in dorms, and she managed that. So we were busy working it was full-time jobs for both of us, about 35 hours a week, and then full-time school. So we were just really busy. And because we were married, a lot of those rules didn't matter as much because we were putting our heads down and just doing our education and trying to save up and get a job after college. But we did that for the 4 years. Oh, we did get pregnant our senior year, which sounds like it's still pretty early to have a kid, but we had to those first 3 years of our marriage where we didn't have children felt like a long time, because people will call it BYU I do because everyone gets married and has kids. And a lot of the women will drop out to have children because there's a very patriarchal view there of that women should be homemakers and nurturers. And I remember even Kim was thinking about it. And I remember I told her, I said, that's bullcrap. Like you get your degree. Like you can do anything you want to do. Like you don't have to assume any role. And that was even when we were Mormon. I just said, you need to have your own education. You have to have your own things in life to be fulfilled. And, my mom had her degree. Your mom had her degree. Why would you not get yours? Like, we don't have to listen to your dad or any other man who says you should just be a homemaker. So she did finish her degree, even though we did have Maddie our senior year, our last semester, our oldest Maddie, and that was 2013. And then we graduated and took our baby to Texas. Dallas, Texas was our first job out of college. So
we've talked a little bit about Kim, and we even talked a little bit about maybe having her join you and do, but you know what? She's got such an interesting story. I'm going to try and get her on the podcast on her own.
She'd be great on her own. She's got a great story.
Yeah, she really does. And I've talked to her enough to know that I think she'll talk to me fine.
Yeah, she will. There's very few people she trusts, but you're one of them. So I think she'd enjoy that. And we do have a kind of a long story, so it's nice to kind of break it up, separately.
Yeah, we're coasting. Nothing in the world could ever take this from me. Alive with the feeling that your loving gives me. We're coasting. Yeah, we're coasting. No one can interrupt my groove today. Been watching gray skies move away. I just don't think that I can lose, and I might just take a cruise and let the sunshine play. Something more, something new, something you get attracted to. That light that shines on water in the midnight blue. So let's ride, catch a vibe, go get lost in our mind. Feels good just to know that I'm alive. Nothing in the world could ever take this from me. Alive with the feeling that your loving gives me. Constant. In a life so filled with rules, there's a stillness that can be. You can only find it if you're waiting patiently and coasting. Yeah, we're coasting. I just wanna come back. I just wanna come back. Losing track of days, losing track of time. stillness that can be. You can only find it if you're waiting patiently and constant. Yeah, we're constant. I just wanna go back. I just wanna go back.
Hey, let's talk about that first job in Texas. How was that experience? And really, I mean, you went on the mission, but even then you were still controlled on what you did, right? I mean,
controlled.
there's really probably no more control the church has over you than when you're on that 2-year mission.
Yeah.
I mean, you're got a lot of rules that you're having to live by. So this was really kind of your first experience, and maybe Kim's. I don't remember her upbringing story, but seems like it was in Idaho most of her life. So you're in Texas and outside the bubble.
Right. And it's interesting. So Kim did grow up in Idaho for those teen years, but she was actually in Lake Havasu, Arizona during her younger years. So she was the one who went to high school where she was one of the only Mormons in high school. Well, I say middle school, I guess. So she had a different growing up than where everyone was for me. She knew what it was like to be the only Mormon in her high school.
Yeah, so she had a little bit of a memory of being where she wasn't in the majority.
So she knew that better than I did. For me, it was foreign. I was like, what is this? And
Yeah.
so we get out to Texas, and we love Texas in a lot of ways. Great food, great economy, great people. Very similar to Utah and Idaho in that regard. Conservative and a lot of families and stuff. As we're out there, the Mormons in Texas were just so much more genuine because they're so spread out geographically. It's not like a whole neighborhood is one ward. You go to Utah, and one neighborhood is one group of people that meets. There's so many Mormons they have to geographically divide. But in Texas, they had huge areas. So basically, you relied on this quote unquote family a lot out in Texas because there weren't as many Mormons. And so you really it was more of a genuine, it was a different experience than being in what I call the Utah, Idaho bubble. And we loved it. There's some families there that took care of us. We had 2 young kids at the time. We had our second kid in Texas. My son Lincoln came along in 2014. They were 13 months apart, which is kind of funny, our kids. So Irish twins is what some people refer to that as, just being 1 year apart, basically. But we only lasted a year in Texas. It was just a year. I had a really tough job in an accounting firm that I struggled with. It was very heads down, and I'm more of a people person. And I had a friend refer me to a job out in the Bay Area, California. So we moved out to the Bay Area, California for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And that's where we had our third kid, Vivian, in 2016. But it was a tech company, and it allowed me, to go from Texas to California, though, I'll tell you, that was a shift. Because not only from conservative to liberal, but just diversity and diversity of thought, not just diversity of people, but diversity of thought. I'll never forget my first day, or my second day at this tech company. I walk in and they're like, "Hey, we have a volunteer event going for a couple hours this afternoon. Can you help us out?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'm a new hire. I'm happy to help." And I show up to this big room, and there's a big banner that says "Lesbians Who Code." That was the name of the event. Now, that's a super normal event in the tech area that happens all the time. Yeah. But for me, the BYU Josh, who had a shirt and tie and a smile and was like, "Oh my gosh, the gays, lesbians who code." And it wasn't like I actually had any ignorant beliefs towards them, but it was a scary unknown. I didn't really know anyone who was a lesbian. But of course I went into the event, helped out everyone, put a smile on, and walked away. And I was like, "Well, we're not in Kansas anymore, Josh. Like, we're not in Idaho or Texas anymore." And so that was, I can't even tell you how amazing those experiences were, though. And we had the 2016 election happen while we lived there, which was very heated. It was Trump and Clinton, Hillary Clinton. It was good for me to be out there during that time because I got to see that, hard right conservatism isn't the only way to do things. And I had a lot of people at the tech company that were like, "Why don't you have a Hillary sticker on your laptop?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really like Trump either. I'm kind of in the middle." And they didn't like that either. And I was like, "Kim, we have these two extremes. We grew up one way with Fox News, and then now we're in California where it's CNN and it's Hillary stickers on our laptops. And I don't even know where I belong anymore. Like, I don't know I don't really want to pick a side. I was like, this is kind of annoying to have to pick a side. So yeah, we did 3 years there, and it was great. We loved California. It was just really expensive with a family of 5, and we were on one income at the time. But that was when Kim, with 3 kids under 3, by the way, 3 kids in 36 months or 31 months, which wasn't on purpose, and just
That's what happens when you start having all that sex, Josh.
it's just back to back to back. And looking back, it's kind of great now because we just have the 3 now. But at the time, we had 3 in diapers. They had 3 having their own binky. We couldn't take the binkies away because there's always a baby, and so then the toddler would take the binky from the baby, and so we were just drowning in kids. And surprisingly, not a lot of help from these families where we worked so hard to get their approval, to be the people pleaser that we always wanted to be. Just really didn't care that much that we were drowning in kids. Really didn't visit, never sent money, just never. And not that I was entitled to that, just that they just didn't seem to care, which was weird.
But do you think that maybe that was their experience as well, and they just thought, they'll be fine, we made it?
I think it's possible, and I think that's fair that, each generation has it different and different ways. And I just was kind of shocked because I sort of thought that the grandparent experience would be just a slightly more hands-on, like just a little bit. I didn't expect much because my whole life I'd been a hard worker, so I wasn't entitled to like, hey, help me pay for my kids. It's more just, are you there? Can you help me out? Like, are you going to visit? Like, and so we had like little glimpses of help, but always kind of just disappointed in no real help. And so our family really became that Mormon group of people out there in the Bay, which was very spread out geographically, which really, we got really close to some families out there. But that's when Kim decided like, hey, I'm going to lose my mind with these 3 kids under 3. I need something. And she had her bachelor's degree, but she goes, I want to start like I want to just do something with my hands. And so she'd always been a sewist and a crafter. And her minor in college was called clothing construction. And so she decided to start a blog where she just takes patterns from craft stores like Joann and Michael's and stuff, and kind of do hacks or change the pattern to make it fit. And then she'd take photos of it, of herself and of the dress, mostly women's clothing, but also baby clothing and kid clothing, and just started putting it out on the internet, kind of like, here's what I did with this pattern, here's how I made it. And she just started that as a hobby blog, it was a mommy blog at the time in 2016. And then my bosses at the tech company said, hey, you've been out here for almost 3 years. We don't have any other offices, but we're going to let you move remotely to live anywhere you want. You can take your Bay Area salary anywhere you want to go. And so that right there's a huge raise if you go somewhere with a lower cost of living. Sure. And at the time, Utah was pretty reasonably priced. Utah and Idaho were great. So we decided to go to Saratoga Springs, Utah, of all places, Utah County. It's near Lehigh. And so we moved to Saratoga Springs, Utah, and instantly, taking that salary to Utah, where you paid off some school debts and some car debts and those 3 kids all at once, just kind of dug ourselves out of a hole. And then Kim's hobby blog started to get attention to the point where she could put some ads on the blog. She could monetize it. She started doing all the social media, and she was a self-taught photographer and videographer. And her business blew up. She started working with brands like Joann Fabrics. She started to just grow this business super fast in about 2017, 2018. And I was still working in tech remotely, and we still had 3 young kids under 5. And then the business really kind of took off. And then around 2020, I actually quit my job in tech to join her full time for 2 years. So 2020 is right when the pandemic started. Mm-hmm. That's when I joined her full time. So we lived remotely in Utah from 2016 to 2020. But in 2020, we read some things about our faith that really kind of concerned us. And it was actually Kim who first heard something from a friend of mine that was kind of a nuanced believer. He kind of thought some of the history was not really there like it should be. All the facts weren't there. And so he would always message me a lot of things about his thoughts, and she would kind of listen in. She would kind of eavesdrop. And then she would always kind of say, oh, I'm gonna prove this wrong. Like, your friend is misguided. I'm gonna go out there online and go to the church's website and sort of prove that he's wrong. And then she found some of these same things on the church's website, that they were finally being a little bit more transparent with their history about multiple versions of the first vision and the book of Abraham. And then there's this CS letter out there that summarizes all of it. And she got pretty mad at me. She's like, you're the returned missionary. You're the patriarch. You're the one who's supposed to know all this. And I mean, she's just angry because she didn't, I know she's panicking, right? And I told her, I said, I had heard some of those things in my mission. I'd always kind of known that there were things but I decided that I was more of a community member where I benefited from the people, the network. The BYU alumni network was huge. You could get a job anywhere with the BYU network. And so I was more like, do I really care? Do I really want to deep dive into this doctrine? Like, what does it mean for me and my relationship with my family, the family reunion, all the people in our neighborhood? Like, is it worth it to do all that? Or is it better just to show up and put a face on and go through the motions? It was kind of the member that I was. She was a true believer, though. She was like, this is completely true. And so for her to read all that and say, we've been deceived, what are we going to do? We were going to buy a lot. We bought a lot in Alpine Highland area, which is kind of the more affluent area of Utah County. And they have Lone Peak High School there and a lot of really rich, kind of snobby Mormon families who are high achieving and keeping up with the Joneses, if you will. And Kim looks at me and, are we gonna stay in the church or not? I was like, we're gonna leave. This is, it's bullshit. And do we really want to build a house right in the utopia of these Mormons? And we said no. And so the first thing she did was pull up Zillow and look at some homes in St. George, Utah, just to get kind of south, let's get out of Utah County. And she found a home on Zillow. We sold our lot and we decided to buy a house down here in St. George and moved down here in 2021. And we've been here for the last almost 3 years now, coming up on 3 years in June. But we left the church in 2020, and that was hard because everyone I've ever known for the most part has been Mormon. I mean, my entire family on my mom's side was, Kim's entire family is, and to tell all those people that were leaving, especially as the oldest grandkid, the oldest child, all the first grandkids on both sides, we had done all these check boxes that we thought we had to do, right? I went on a mission. We both went to a church school, BYU, Idaho. We got a job. We had 3 kids. We're doing the whole checkbox list of the Mormon experience. But I remember, Larry, quite a bit during that almost 10 years of our lives. So from age 21 to 31, that whole decade, really not making any decisions with my full and complete awareness. They talk about a lot about dissociation. Kim and I realized those young years with children were dissociated, where we're just going through the motions and checking the boxes of all the things we're supposed to do because the Mormons have set out this plan for us and we don't have to question it. We just do it. But then at 31, and when Kim was 27, 28, and I was 31, that's when we read those things and our whole world fell apart because we could finally make decisions for ourselves. And the first thing I did was like, no, church is not for me. I want to watch football on Sundays. I want to get a tattoo. I want to raise my kids with critical thinking and nuance and to know that there's lots of world religions out there. There's lots of beliefs out there. I wanted them to have a different experience. And my oldest, Maddie, was 7 years old at the time when we read this. And as most people know, at age 8, kids get baptized in the Mormon church. And so this is a huge milestone, one of the biggest milestones of their lives, one of the first ones. And there's a lot of cultural pressure around that. And I remember even after we realized that all of it was not true, I had even been such a people pleaser, such a conditional love person that I was telling my wife, we'll still just baptize her because your mom wants her to be baptized and my mom wants her to be baptized. And there's this pressure. And Kim looked at me and said, no, like, Josh, you have to wake up. Like, this is our life now. We can make our own choices. And I was like, well, then you get to tell your mom. You get to be the one to let the mother-in-law know that we're not going to baptize our daughter. But my daughter's one of those kids who loves a list of rules. And she will follow them to the T. So I was afraid of giving her this list of rules as an 8-year-old kid where they get this thing of like, now the sins are yours and Satan can enter your mind and things can happen to you if you don't obey and all the weird things that come with those beliefs. I'm really glad she never got any of that because now she's 10, almost 11, and she's a different kind of kid now where she never had to be indoctrinated at 8. And she thinks for herself now and she has a bit of a voice. Now, St. George is still very heavily Mormon. It's very populated Mormon, especially the area that we live in, tons of families. But people are a little more nuanced here. It's warmer weather. There's all spending time outdoors. They're not worried about what you're wearing and what you're doing nearly as much. I feel like Southern Utah is a good mix of like, it has the Utah family values mixed with like a California, Arizona weather. And there's just like a nice mix here of things but sometimes we do get exhausted by the number of Mormons here because it can be hard to, but we found that there's a lot of ex-Mormons. There's a lot of people who have left the church, and we've kind of built our own community. I mean, that's how I met you, was through other ex-Mormons and kind of this network of people. And it's not built in for us. We kind of have to do the work to go and find the ex-Mormons. So that's kind of how, that journey played through. I might have skipped over some things. I don't know if you want to touch on anything in particular, but
one thing I was going to talk about just a moment would be that the fact that we're all the religion of our parents. You and I grew up in this high demand Mormon religion. Folks that listen to my podcast, and I've got listeners in 46 countries last time I looked, a lot of them don't know anything about Mormonism, or they know very little. And I've been on 10 or 12 or 15 podcasts where I'm the guest, and every single time the host wants to know about Mormonism and this and that. And so I get it because it's interesting to them. Yeah. You even said to Kim, or maybe in your mind, you were like, okay, well, now that I know these things, I can still go to church. It's easier just to kind of go along with the flow and not upset the family. And I can't tell you how many people I know that that's what they're doing, even now. And we call them PMOs, right? Physically in, mentally out. But that's not just in the Mormon religion. Yeah. That's Jewish friends I have, or Catholic friends that I have. Our daughter, who left the Mormon faith, she's very devout, non-denominational Christian, her and her husband, Jack. And we support that. We're like, hey, we want you guys to do what you want to do. And that's how I feel about religion overall. I think it works for a lot of people.
Sure.
And there's a lot of people that they are so used to it. It's what they've known their whole lives. Yeah, they might question things once in a while, but it's kind of back to what you said. It's just easier to go along. And I get that too. And so I use that term. You can disagree, but you don't need to be disagreeable. And so I get along with my family members who are still very much into the Mormon faith, the majority of them. I'm fine with that, if that's what makes them happy. But at the end of the day, nobody knows. That's right. What I always say. Yeah. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
They just want you to think they do, as I read the subtitle of your book here in front of me.
Well, I realize that different religions, people are different areas of activity within their religion, where they're, like I say, Jewish, call it Muslim. But those that are really devout, they believe they do have the answers, and they know what's going to happen in the next life. And I'm fine if that's what they want to believe. I don't have any problem with that. I know nobody knows.
Yeah. Well, as long as they're not harming other people, right? I think that's the thing too, is like, as long 100%. As your beliefs aren't harming other people,
right?
And you're not like viciously or maliciously hurting others, then I think that, there's definitely got to be space for that. I don't think Mormons have done a good job of creating a space for, as they would call apostates or non-believers. I feel like it's kind of an all or nothing. I know some religions can be like that too, but
like cafeteria Mormons, because that's what we don't have in the Mormon faith is you have a lot of cafeteria Jews or cafeteria Catholics. It might just come a few times a year, and they're still counted.
Yes, accepted, loved, counted. It's not.
But the high demand religions. It's not just Mormonism. It could be
Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, or even Jehovah's Witness.
Yes,
they don't have a lot of room for those that aren't devout.
It's true, and that can be hard because it can be isolating when your entire community was built upon this shared faith. And then you leave that faith, and it wasn't like people were super mean about it. They just went quiet.
Sure.
There was a lot of awkwardness where we thought we had this huge network, this huge community of people. But as soon as we said we no longer believe in this, we're no longer going, people just disappeared. People unfriended on social media when we shared something about our new beliefs. One of the things I hate the most about leaving a religion, especially in the Mormon situation, is that they say, oh, Mormons can leave the church but never leave it alone. And to that I would say, if you're going to proselytize by going out and knocking doors as missionaries, which is an admirable thing to do if you want to share your message, then I feel like you shouldn't be able to say that I can't share my thoughts about my now beliefs, which are more agnostic and atheist, where I don't really know, but I can't deny that there might be something there. I don't feel like I have to know to live my life. But if I want to share something about something I think is damaging, or I want to share something that means something to me. I mean, as we're speaking right now, Larry, there's a general conference going on for the LDS Church. It's the Saturday session.
Oh, that's this weekend?
Yeah, it's this weekend, the first weekend of April.
So awesome that I didn't even know that.
And it's going on right now. And I just, it's been programmed in my brain every October, every April, the first Saturday, Sunday. And that for me was actually a great family ritual we had, where we get together and bake things with my mom, and all the kids would come around and do things. And so that was another tradition that was sort of ripped from us, that we decided to let that go because we decided to leave. But I think it's important that, you know, as your beliefs change in life, that you leave space for others to share what they want to share. As long as you're not harming people, I think we should be able to speak up about the things that we believe in. And if we think that someone says something that is harmful and we want to call that out, we should be able to do that in our free society that we live in now, that we should be able to do that and not be shamed for that, or to say that we're, you know, somehow a bad person for voicing our voice. One thing that's been great for us since 2020 that we've done a lot of work on is our mental health, you know, getting therapy, learning about neurodiversity or neurodivergent traits. Kim and I could talk about this for hours, but something that's very, very passionate, something we call it our reconstruction period, because there's been a lot of, and I hope I don't sound too negative, but this journey of, you know, leaving a faith is kind of, it can sound negative to people, but in a way it was kind of like hitting rock bottom and being able to come up off of that and say, now that I can do anything that I want, now that I have the freedom to think how I want to think, say what I want to say, what do I want to learn more about? What do I want to spend my time focusing on? And obviously we've always been parents. And so parenting is one of the first things that I dedicate a lot of my time to, is making sure I'm being the best parent that I can be, but also working on my own thoughts and feelings and trauma, right? Like mental health now is way more available than it ever has been. And I know that generations in the past haven't had mental health services available to them like we do now. I mean, now you can literally get on a Zoom call with BetterHelp in 5 minutes to talk to a therapist. It's at the tips of our fingers because of technology. And we now have the research that backs that therapy is a good thing to do. And it's less taboo. It's more widely acceptable. Like you might go to the gym and work out your muscles and lift some weights and do some cardio, and you're doing a physical workout. Well, what about a mental workout? You know, what would you do for that? Maybe you go for a walk. I mean, that's physical too, but maybe you speak to someone, you call someone you love, you do something mentally that will help you. And so having a therapist, it's literally changed our lives. And I really don't think, I think that therapy is for everyone, and it can be for everyone. And there's just so many things you can learn about yourself, about your past, and how to operate day to day in your present, to accept the past and to look forward to your future. In therapy, we've been able to just come up with things that help us cope with some of those things, like they call inner childhood work. So a lot of my inner childhood, where I was throwing newspapers at 5 a.m. on doorsteps as a 9-year-old kid, I probably should have been playing with Legos. Or, you know, I just have some trauma around not really getting to be a kid because I was trying to get that conditional love. And so now as an adult, I build big Lego sets with my 9-year-old son, who's 9 now. And it's really for me too, though. It's even if he wasn't around, I'd still do it myself. And I often do spend some late nights just building Legos, because it was something my therapist helped me realize. Something from your childhood you wish you would have had more of. You wish you would have had more money and more time to just be a kid because you were so worried about finances. And so now I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, listening to YouTube channels and audiobooks, and building Legos for my mental health, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have found that out if it hadn't been for therapy. And, you know, using your hands to make something, to do something, to clear your mind. Therapy has been huge for us. Also, part of this is, a lot of times people are afraid of therapy because they're afraid of like a diagnosis, or they're afraid of like the medical stigma around therapy, which I think with time it's getting better and better. I do see millennials and Gen Z making great progress around this. Gen Z would never stigmatize somebody for talking to a therapist. They don't see it any different than you going to see your trainer at the gym. The Gen Z just sees that. And I think we need to embrace that no matter what age we might be. And I wish I had better relationships with my grandparents and parents now to encourage them to go speak to a therapist. I did try and tell them, and it didn't ever land because, some of them think it's just ridiculous. But to me, it's a mental workout. But one thing we learned about a lot is in our parenting, they call it neurodivergent parenting. So people hear about like the autism spectrum, ADHD, there's all kinds of personality disorders and mood disorders. And people will say, oh, there's, I don't want to go and get diagnosed, or I don't want to go and work with I don't want the stigma of a diagnosis. And that's fair, because I don't think a diagnosis should have to define your life either. But I say, go and do things in therapy to learn more information. A diagnosis can just simply be information. It doesn't have to be, oh, I have to do all these things a certain way the rest of my life, or this is going to define me forever. So my wife at age 29 learned that she's on the autism spectrum. And autism is a very large spectrum, right? There's all kinds of different people on the autism spectrum, from high needs to low needs, and all in between. I like to say it's like more of a pie, like a circle pie chart. And there's categories of your life, let's say like sensory and social and physical and all these different areas within your pie chart that you might struggle with certain areas in that pie chart. And you might be because you're on the spectrum, or you have certain aspects of your brain that work a little bit differently. And they're invisible unless you talk about them. Like sometimes you can see a boy who's flapping his arms. There's like the stereotypical autistic kid, but there's so much more to it than that. And being a woman, especially little girls, they just didn't get diagnosed, because girls are good at what they call masking. They put on a face and they say, I'm going to imitate my friend's behavior to blend in so no one can notice me. Whereas the little boys will often have a meltdown or whatever, and it's more obvious to a teacher, so they can get called out as a behavioral thing, and then they go and get tested. So Kim has always felt differently in her brain her whole life, certain things and certain traits. And so her it's funny enough, she went to BYU, but there were these PhD doctors at BYU. There's a clinic there, and one of the more liberal professors there helped her go through this whole day of tests to understand her. And we learned that two of our kids are on the spectrum as well. So our older two fall on the spectrum as well. And yes, when you meet them, you wouldn't fully notice it. Like it's not something that you'd see in the moment, but there are aspects of their life that are harder, that this is just knowledge for us to say, okay, my son has sensory needs. He needs to have really soft blankets. He needs to be able to come home and pet his cat after a long day at school. Like there's just small things that make his life happier. There's dietary things that help too with their digestive process. So learning about ADHD and autism, people think they hear autism, they're like, oh, it's a disability that you can't overcome, or it needs to be cured. Some of the extreme people want to cure these things. And I tell them, no, it's information, right? And I think there's a lot of kids today with, there's a lot of attention issues, it runs in genetic families too. People don't realize that they've put on a face or a mask to overcome some of those struggles. They don't tell anybody about it. But if you go to therapy, you're able to open up your life to everything, your genetic history, stuff that your parents and grandparents were never willing to sit down and talk about. I think a lot of us, if we could, would sit down with our great-grandparents and our grandparents and say, tell me about your medical history. Tell me about your mental history. Like, I want to know more about the genes that I have, and about like the things I'm more, if you had heart disease, or if it was physical, you'd pay really close attention to it. But what about the mental stuff too? So I know that's a long tangent, but I wanted to talk about Reconstruction and how much therapy really has impacted our history in the last 3 years, our story as parents. I'm such a better dad now, because I look at my kids and I go, you don't have to be something for me to be proud of you. Like, you might have things you struggle with, and I'm going to help you. I'm not going to helicopter and solve all your problems. You have to struggle and fail and do things. I'm not a perfect parent, but it has helped me to know that my kids have special needs or things that they need to be a better dad, to be more patient, to pay attention to their mental and emotional needs, not just their physical needs. And so that's been quite a journey for us the last couple of years. And we're still learning things. There's a lot of podcasts out there now about it. There's a lot of information available. about all of those things. And, it's been quite a journey for us as parents who are learning about, mental health and neurodivergent stuff. So,
you talked about being on a tangent. I was just thinking that listening to you talk about what you've learned and what you've done is a form of therapy in itself. I mean, it really is. I mean, this is a therapeutic experience for me every time I do an interview. It really is I hear other people's stories. Some of them, obviously, if I'm talking to somebody who's grown up like I did in the Mormon faith, then there's that, oh, I get you, man. Yeah, totally understand. But even when I don't, and I'm talking to somebody who's an atheist or somebody who's a Catholic, or I talk to some gal in England who grew up in a very small but super, super conservative cult, it made our upbringing look, and nothing bad about our upbringing compared to that. So that's the whole thing, though. When you get out and you explore and you talk and you visit and you hear other people's perspectives, I love it, because I don't think there's just one way of thinking and that there's just one answer to every question. That I think I think that's what you have done. You are parenting in a much different style than your parents did and that Kim's parents did. We know that.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you that Judy and I parented our children differently, because you get the things that you want to, oh, my parents did this very well, I want to do that also.
Yes,
but
right.
Hey, I think we could have done better over here. So
and you do get the benefits of past generations. I will say that too. I mean, I think it's important to hold people accountable for the things that they do, but I also think you have to give grace based on, the time period that someone grew up in. I mean, there weren't mental health podcasts for my grandpa when he was raising kids, right? So we can just say, like, there's the information you have available to you then has a big influence over what you're able to do with your life. And so, even though we do have some estrangement with a family, some of those boundaries have been put in place for our protection to help to protect us. And there are cons to the way we parent now too. I don't want to speak as like some parenting expert, right? We will do things to our kids that they end up in therapy for. Like, there's no perfect way to be a parent. And so even though we're doing our best right now and we have a lot of information right now, we still make mistakes. I still sometimes yell at my kids. I still sometimes do things that are not the best way to be a parent. And so that's the thing about parenting, is you just have to try every day to be better. That's all you can do. And you do have an obligation to look at the information around you and be open to learning from that. I do think that parents should have to hold themselves accountable to that, at least. One thing that I do love the most is that Kim and I grew up people pleasers. We've talked about this a little bit, that conditional love. I apologize to my kids all the time. I don't think I ever had my parents apologize to me. And the reason why that's so important is that they know that I'm not perfect. Adults aren't meant to be put on a pedestal. And it allows my kids to function as a human and to make mistakes and to not live for conditional love. I look at my daughter and I say, she's playing volleyball. Whether you make the team or not, I don't care. If you have fun playing and you enjoy it, I will support you every minute that I can. But you're not required to play volleyball in order to receive love from your dad, right? You have value, you have inherent worth just by waking up in the morning, because you're my daughter and I love you. And there's nothing you can do. I mean, it really is unconditional love. There's nothing you can do that would make me not love you anymore, right? And I think for a kid, that's like, it's just so fun to see that, because we obviously didn't get that. And so instead of people pleasing our kids for us, they don't walk around, oh, I got to do this for mom and dad, and I got to worry about achieving. I've always said that high demand religions set up a terrible system for mothers, typically, or those who don't work. And usually in a patriarchal high demand religion, statistically, the woman will stay home with the kids. But then she gets her full confidence, her full purpose in life from those children and their achievements. And so if they don't achieve well, then it's like a reflection in her mind on her as a person. And they call it narcissistic or borderline parenting. And there is a lot of narcissism built in to high demand religion parents. And so for us breaking free of that with kids that are under the age of 7, I remember telling Kim, I'm like, I'm not so set on them going to some prestigious college now. I'm not so set on my son playing every sport that I played. If he doesn't like basketball, screw it. He doesn't have to play basketball. Play the sports you want to play, son. I do think they should do something. I as a dad, I feel obligated to push my kids to do things. You got to try at least once. If you hate it, try something else. Find the thing that you like. I think my daughter's quit like 5 sports, but she found the one she loves, and that's volleyball. And so after struggling with soccer cleats and basketball games and all these other activities she's done, we found the thing that she likes. And volleyball is not my favorite sport, but she shouldn't live her life for me as her parent, right? And so that's been so nice, is to watch our kids be able to be who they are, to do the hobby. My son's a gamer. He likes to game. He likes to build Minecraft and build Lego. He has an engineering brain. I mean, this kid, he loves to build things with his mind. He doesn't love to play football, my favorite sport to watch. And that's okay. And I would not have been that way as a high demand religion, churchgoer, because I thought I needed to live vicariously through them. That was part of the culture, is that they had to please us and do what we said. We have all the power. And so to flip the switch on that, it's like, no, your achievements are not my achievements. There's like a separation of self there. My wife, Kim, has really been able to do that by having a career that helped her see that she just isn't completely defined by motherhood. Because Mormons will pedestalize mothers and motherhood as this sacred thing that can never be replaced. And while it is important to be a father or a mother as an identity, it is not your full identity. You have other things that you need. It's healthy to have hobbies, to have friends, to have platonic friends, to have a romantic partner. You have other things in your life that matter to make the best full you. And parenting, I mean, I have grandparents I look at, and I just feel so sad for some of my grandmas who have never been able to do anything for themselves ever. It's all about how their kids and grandkids make them look. And it's just kind of sad to me that they live their lives hoping for achievements. And then you have wayward kids like me, the black sheep of the family, who leaves the religion, and I'm no longer that golden child, the oldest of 18 grandkids, who does all the things that they want me to do. And that's okay, because I feel like I'm a cycle breaker. I'm taking the past and saying, that was what it was then, and now I have this new thing I want to do for my family. I don't want my daughter to feel like she has to accomplish anything for me. I want her to go and accomplish things for herself. I'll be there to support her along the way, but also I'm not going to do everything for her. She has to learn to fail, right? There's a balance there. There's a balance in not being too much of a helicopter parent where you're like doing everything for them, and then they don't know how to do anything themselves. So Kim and I are constantly pulling back and saying, we got to let her fail. Got to let her try this thing. And then she'll come to us and we'll help her, but she has to try it first on her own. And that's actually harder for us rather than, the other way. So just some fascinating things in the last 3 years we've been able to change about the way that we, and also in our marriage too, just not being everything for that person. Like, it's impossible to make a spouse happy. Like, they have to show up and be happy too. Like, you can do things for each other, but it's no one's job to be obligated to the other and make them happy. Like, you've got to show up together and choose each other. And so that, the eternal marriage thing that they have in the Mormon religion, to me, was like this awesome thing I could rely on. But then once I kind of lost that belief, it was like, oh, we show up every day and we choose each other, and we choose to love each other, to serve each other. But also, you don't have to do everything for me. Like, we try to have an equal relationship where, I do the chores and you do things at work, and we switch it up, and we try to keep it equal and balanced as much as we can. It's not always perfect, but that's been fascinating too, because I grew up in a society where it was like, men don't change diapers, men don't do dishes. Like, it was women did that. And I'm like, no, that's things have changed. There's a lot more hands-on dads. Millennial dads are really taking back the mantle of like, I can be a caregiver. Any human can be a caregiver. They just have to, it's just effort. Parenting oftentimes is just effort. Anyway, just more of that journey of that reconstruction ever since we left the church. So,
and that's quite a journey you've been on. And if you think about it this way, as a participant in a high demand religion, you're living your life for the next life. So your grandmothers, when you say, gosh, you feel bad that they didn't do all these things, well, they would probably say, oh no, this is exactly what I wanted to do because I'm going to be able to live as an eternal family after this life. Whereas now, when I say bullshit on all that, this is the only life in my mind. If I'm wrong, okay, I'm wrong. Maybe there is something else. Maybe there's reincarnation, or maybe there's other dimensions. I mean, I have no idea. I'm open to anything. I just know that the way I was brought up, I know that's not correct, and I know that's not accurate. 100%. So I look at it like this. My life, and from what I'm listening to, your life is a want to, not a have to.
Yes, that's so good.
Yeah.
Want to, not a have to. It's a different way of seeing the world. I've done a lot of like researching on Stoicism lately. It's been a thing for me. Marcus Aurelius, Roman Greeks, just the things. Stoicism's more of a philosophy, not a religion, right? There's nothing required of you. It's more of a mindset. And I have this tattooed on my arm right here. It says memento mori. And memento mori means remember that you will die. And it's a little bit morbid, like, oh, remember that you will die. But what it does is it reminds me every day that, like, at any moment, this could be my last day. This Stoicism principle just reminds you that, like, you know, live for the now, pay attention. If it's your last conversation with Larry here on the podcast, make sure it's a good one. You know, live your life that way so you don't have any regrets. And that's been pretty opening for me to see that, where I'm not like just living for this future state that I have all this confidence in. Like, what's the point? They even call it a temporary probationary state here on Earth. That's what Mormons will call it. They'll say, "Oh, it's a temporary thing. It's a probationary state. You just endure to the end, and then once we die, we become gods and all those things." And it's like, well, what about this time now? Like, there's value in this time now. We should be able to create and learn and grow and to have freedom, autonomy. I like to use the word autonomy. You say like the have to and the want to, which is really good. But to want to do something is to have the autonomy, the permission, the flexibility to do it, right? And for after 30 years of being told I couldn't do certain things, now I can do anything. It's kind of overwhelming to just, oh, I can do anything now. Like I have all this, I almost didn't think I had freedoms. I didn't have the ability to choose. Even though I did make those choices, I don't blame anybody for the choices. It didn't feel like I had the choice at the time because of the cultural pressure. People are like, oh, you chose to have kids young. I'm like, yes, technically, yes, I made the choice. But did I? Like, was I fully aware of the consequences of the choice? And I think there's also a mourning and a grieving that happens. And it is healthy to mourn and grieve the past so that you can move on. And I think that what I had to mourn, and a lot of ex-Mormons in their 30s and 40s will say that they had to mourn those 20s, where instead of partying in college and having a good time and exploring the world and exploring relationships, they were having babies and in college and jumping into their careers and didn't really get to enjoy their 20s. They couldn't even have coffee. They couldn't even have alcohol. Like, they had all these rules on them. And so I have a lot of friends in their 30s and 40s now that we're meeting that are leaving the church, because there's a lot of people that are leaving the church right now. And a lot of them are in that age bracket of 30s to 40s. And a lot of us are just mourning those years of just, I didn't really get to be a young adult. I didn't have that chance. It was kind of stolen from me in some ways. And so there's resentment there. So you have to kind of grieve and mourn that time period and say, I got to let that go. And I just got to focus on now. I always tell people, I'm like, aren't you glad though that you found out when you were 30 or 35 instead of when you were 80 or 90? Like, aren't you glad that you have this many years left of your life to live it with autonomy? That's kind of my optimistic way of looking at it, is that the sooner you find out, the better, so you can have that many more years, under that autonomy. So.
Well, and my tattoo, we love our tattoos, right? Because they help us to, we are individuals, right? And that's the other thing about high demand religions, is they just want you to be cookie cutter, just like the next guy. They don't like you to think and use your brain. But I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Okay. And that's because I control what is going to happen. I'm not looking for anybody else to hold the puppet strings over me. It's up to me. I don't have anybody there that's controlling my puppet strings. I'm not a puppet for anybody anymore, and that's freeing. That's very freeing. Yeah. And that's what I hear, and that's my takeaway from listening to you today for the last hour or so, is that you guys are at a place in your life where you don't have all the answers. And you're okay with that.
Yeah, and you do have to be okay with that. My son was asking me about God the other day on the way to school, and he was just like, it's okay to not know, right? Like if I don't have an answer, because he has a friend that keeps asking him about, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Jesus? And he says, I don't know. And then the kid panics because he's like, what do you mean you don't know? And I mean, they're 9, so it's fine. But I was trying to tell him that it's hard to tell a 9-year-old that it's okay to not know, because they want to know the facts about everything. They have 100 questions every day. And so to teach a kid that, but I gave him a book about world religions. I said, hey, look at this, open up this map. If you were born in that country, you'd have this percentage of being that religion. And if you were born in this country, you'd have this percentage of being that religion. And it really opened up his brain. He was like, so I'm Mormon because I was born in Utah or Idaho? And like, yes, because that's what, so that helped him see that, it's not just his little Mormon experience in St. George, Utah, that it could have been a different experience in so many different areas. And so that really helps. I think the diversity, we lack a lot of diversity in Utah. And that's why as my kids become teenagers, we've really got to force them to go travel and do things, to have experiences in other places so that they see that the world is not just this little bubble. And that's where we constantly debate, like, should we stay in Utah? Because I feel like the kids aren't getting that experience of, being diverse at all, like to be among others that have other beliefs and stuff. So constantly thinking about that.
A lot of value in that. And I'll tell you this, having lived in, my parents moved around a little bit. Judy's parents, her dad was military. They lived in a lot of places. Yeah. And I think it really benefited both of us because, I was a 12-year-old living in Nashville, Tennessee. I grew up and went to junior high in San Diego. I grew up in Southern California in my youth. We've lived in Hawaii. We've lived in Las Vegas. We've lived all over the place. And I've seen a lot of diversity, and I've had diversity in my work life and career. And it's been very good. It's been fulfilling. I love learning. And so to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that grew up in North Carolina and he tells you about his upbringing, it's like a whole different world.
Yeah.
And it's much more interesting, I think, than sitting down and talking with somebody who grew up in the same town you grew up in with the same thoughts being told to them and what to believe and what to do. And so I don't remember the exact quote, but I think it was Mark Twain who said that travel, it really hurts. Just that singular way of thinking.
Yes. Is
you get out there, and once you travel and you see other cultures and you see other people, then you start to really understand that this really is a whole world of not just diverse people, but also good people. There's a lot of good people in the world.
Yeah, tons of good people. I remember when we lived in California for those 3 years that literally changed our lives. I remember telling Kim, I want to write a book, and I remember I had the title all picked out, and I haven't done it, but the title was going to be Small Town Syndrome, meaning, and there's nothing wrong with being raised in a small town, but if you never leave that small town and you never travel outside of it and you only stay in that small town your whole life, I do have some friends and even Kim's family who have mostly stayed in that same town their whole life. They don't see outside of that town, right? And that religion and that population. And it's like, you need a diverse experience in life. Even if it just means going to different states in the United States, at least that's something that you're doing to get outside of that. But being stuck in that mentality of small town syndrome where you're only, pushing yourself so far. And so we're constantly thinking about that as parents, that we broaden their experiences beyond just what they experience in their small town. So there's a lot of diversity of thought out there, and trying to find people where you can learn that. And podcasts is a great way to do that, just to learn and listen to others and their lived experiences. You can gain a lot from just listening to other people.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, hey man, I appreciate you sharing your story today. It's fun for me. We're both talkers, and but I learn a lot more when I listen.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. I think that the Mormon Stories podcast was a great experience, but there were a lot of other sort of themes, and a lot of time was spent with Kim, and as it should be. But I feel like there were a lot of things I wanted to talk about that I didn't get a chance to do, and it's nice to be able to kind of be in this safe environment with a good guy that I have a lot of respect for, and I do love what you say about how everyone has their own story, and I think that everyone's story matters the same, even though some stories might get more attention than others. you can learn from anyone. And so I think having that mentality of learning from anyone, that humility to learn from anyone, I mean, if that's as close as we get to God, I think that would be, in my mind, learning from others, no matter where they are in life, how much money they make or what their job is or who they know and how famous they are, listening to anyone, learning from their story. To me, that's the value that you really bring to the world. And I'm glad I have a copy of your book now. Here we go. I should have known that you had a book. I knew you had a podcast, but I didn't know you had a full book. So now I'm going to read this book.
Well, thanks, Josh. I appreciate your kind remarks, and I'll give you an amen. All right, everyone. Hey, check back in 2 weeks. We're going to have another interesting guest, and eventually we're going to have Kim on here if I have anything to say about it. So, Josh, I'm going to hope for your support as well. So,
Good.
all right, everyone. Catch you in 2 weeks. Aloha.
Down a little old country road not far away.